Back up for discussion today was House Bill 195. We talked about it a few times this week. It's the one aimed at preventing protests at private homes. Protests and demonstrations like this one at Representative Greg Chaney's home Wednesday night. Representative Chaney is co-sponsoring the bill, and as a result, well, you can expect, protesters showed up to his home with torches and pitchforks, according to Chaney. Representative Chaney tells us he wanted to co-sponsor this legislation with Representative Brooke Green in response to a string of protests we started seeing last year. From a Meridian police officer's home last spring to continued protests at elected officials and health board members' homes. We've heard a lot of common sense talk about this bill, how a home is supposed to be a private retreat, a safe place for families, off limits to those looking to intimidate or harass. Are those the same sentiments, though, shared by the people of Idaho who testified today? Joe Paris brings us details on this afternoon's committee meeting and how they voted. Joe?
Well, Brian, after 90 minutes of public testimony as well as debate among lawmakers, we saw this bill actually pass on a vote of 11-4. So it'll now move out of the committee stage and onto the full House floor. Similar to what we saw throughout the week, and namely on Wednesday, every member of the public that testified on the bill today, they testified against it. And we heard some similar concerns that we heard earlier this week from people that say they thought that the bill may not be constitutional, that protesting at homes, if done appropriately, was a way to be heard when there was no other ways to be heard. An interesting note, today we actually heard testimony on the bill from the ACLU legal director against the bill. Here's what he had to say, as well as some Idahoans.
Now is not the time at all to be adding additional crimes to the Idaho code. We have a criminal legal system in the state that is overloaded as it is.
If you do not want to hear us, how can we make our voices be heard?
Every effort has been made, that I can tell, to silence the voice of the people. It's a huge battle just to be able to get 3 minutes before you, or today 2 minutes.
People can be arrested for being annoying. I can be annoying. I can be annoying standing in here. I can be annoying in a grocery store.
Again, all members of the public that testified on the bill in person and over Zoom today were against House Bill 195. The two major voices in support of it were the bill's co-sponsors, Democrat Representative Brooke Green from Boise, as well as Republican Representative Greg Chaney. We've talked about him. He represents Caldwell. Both of them brought up the conversation about democracy and, in their opinion, about what was appropriate and what was part of our social contract. Both representatives also brought up the idea of what type of a political environment we want here in Idaho.
Where in history has it ever been okay for someone to show up at someone's house with pitchforks and torches? Absolutely never was that part of our contract to one another as neighbors. The existing statutes and concerns regarding the First Amendment are very important to us, while at the same time, the sacred homes, our sacred families, weigh as just as important.
If this bill passes, you will nonetheless have the same right to protest that you have now. It is a location restriction only, and it is a narrow one.
Again, the bill, House Bill 195, passes out of committee on an 11-4 vote. Those 4 no votes brought up some similar concerns that we heard yesterday for Professor Shakira Sanders from the University of Idaho. Lawmakers were concerned about specific wording in the bill, as some of the people alluded to today, saying that picketing with the intent to harass, annoy, or alarm may be too vague. People wanted to know what would the legal definition of annoy be. There was also concerns about the section of the bill that said you'd be allowed to protest or picket, I should say, outside of a home if it was also the primary business place for that individual. Again, Brian, this passed out of committee after about 90 minutes this afternoon. We're expecting to see it on the House floor next week.
Well, talking about that constitutionality, Joe, Representative Chaney told us earlier this week that they copied this bill, the language of this bill, directly from the Arizona law that has been in place since the 90s, and that has been held up in court so far. So I guess we'll see how it plays out as this moves forward. Thanks, Joe.